Has anyone wrongfully assumed you were dumb and in the process made themselves look really dumb? What's your story? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. As a lifeguard, we had a rule that very young kids needed an adult in the water within arm's reach in the main pool. I saw this mom and her 5-year-old walk in. Mom is wearing jeans and on her phone, clearly not planning on swimming. I anticipate the issue and go to talk to her before the kid gets in. I explain our policy, that the pool is 4 feet deep minimum, and that the policy is for the safety of the child, that having a parent close by who can respond in case of drowning immediately is by far faster than relying on the lifeguard to get down, jump in, and swim all the way out for a rescue. She says it's a stupid policy, that her kid is a fantastic natural swimmer, that they take him to the lake and he swims just fine, that I'm just harassing her, that I just don't want to do my job. All the classic offended parent BS. Literally, while she's telling me this, the kid runs and jumps into the pool, dog paddles about 10 feet away from the edge, and then goes into active drowning, requiring a rescue from my other lifeguard, who thankfully was basically already there to catch the kid. She signed the refusal of care and left quicker than anyone I had ever seen. Felt bad for the kid. She seemed almost mad at him for making her look like an idiot. Story 2. I was a service desk technician at a hospital, helping a doctor reset his password. He kept misspelling the temporary password. It was welcome, 2345. Turns out he thought welcome has 2 L's and freaked out at me citing his education and my, at the time, lack thereof as evidence that he was right. After going back and forth, he got frustrated and handed me off to his nurse and left. She got it on the first try, then apologized to me for her boss's behavior. Funniest part was as she was hanging up, I heard her talking to another nurse saying, "Yeah, Dr. Dumbass couldn't spell welcome again." Answer, I work with a large group of doctors. In my experience, there are 2 types. Type 1 are doctors, master woodworkers, first chair cellists, have run the Boston Marathon 6 times, have 7 kids, and do their own oil changes. Type 2 are doctors, and that's it. They know being a doctor inside and out, but you are always slightly surprised they managed to figure out how to get to work that day. Story 3. I film and edit promotional videos, then post them on my company's YouTube channel. The day after I uploaded a particular run-of-the-mill video, my manager calls me into his office because one of our douchebag directors, who dislike our department and loves undermining me in particular, sent an email to my manager and a few higher-ups. In the email, he stated that I had messed up the promo video because there were all of these other disgusting videos attached to it. As proof, he included a screenshot of the end of the video, where all of the recommended videos appeared to star scantily clad Asian women in suggestive poses. Neither he nor my manager knew how YouTube algorithms worked, and that the videos were suggested because he, or someone on his account, viewed that kind of content before. I have no idea how my manager explained this to him. Answer, has something similar happened at my last job with customers? We had 1 or 2 customers claim that we had adult content links on our website, and no one could find evidence of this when we checked. I'm 99 sure it had something to do with whatever the person had been looking at before online, and they assumed it was us. I'm not sure how the conversation went after that, but I wish I had been there, lol. Story 4. I had a boss who thought everyone was an idiot. One morning, the computer in the office wasn't working. She asked me if I know anything about computers. I tell her that I've used one before. She tells me to check the computer in the office and see if I can figure out why it stopped working. I press the power button and she calls me a moron, telling me that she had already tried that herself. I get under the desk for a moment, then come back up. I tell her to press the power button again. It comes right on. She asks me what was wrong with it. I tell her it was unplugged. Story 5. Our school's schedule got revamped, which meant that one of our classes that was 2 periods long was cut in half to accommodate for all the changes. When I brought this up to the teacher I was co-teaching with, she called me an idiot and told everyone sitting in our table group that I wasn't very good at math as everyone laughed. A few minutes later, the principal cleared up the new schedule, only for her to realize that she was wrong in the first place. Felt so good to see the look on her face when she realized she was the dumbass and not me. Story 6. Guy tried to tell me he knew my job more than I did because he went to school to be an engineer, and I just sell the machines. Emailed him info directly from the manufacturer on why he was wrong. He's not my client anymore. Don't care, fudge him and anyone who uses education as a reason to be a male body part. Story 7. Had a friend in college who was very full of himself. One morning while eating breakfast in the cafeteria, someone said, I wonder how bagels are made. I said, I'm pretty sure bagels are boiled. The pompous friend then said, what are you, stupid? Bagels aren't boiled. That's fang ridiculous. Someone did a quick Google search to find that bagels are, in fact, boiled. People seem genuinely intrigued by this information. Story 8. When I was in 8th grade, we just learned about the seasons and Earth's rotation and all that. To my surprise, my teacher taught us that the Earth is actually closest to the sun during winter. But it's cold because of the tilt on the axis, not because of proximity to the sun. The tilt determines the seasons. And then soon after that, I went to math class, and my math teacher said something about how it was freezing because we are so far from the sun. And of course, I piped up to tell him he was wrong, according to what Mr. Science teacher had just taught us. My math teacher went off ripping into me so hard in front of the class. It was lighthearted. He was known for being funny and making fun of kids all the time. Him and I were going back and forth for a while, and I specifically remember him saying, oh yeah, because when I'm cold, I move away from the fire. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I kept arguing, no, it's because of the Earth's tilt. And so finally he Googled it, and I was right. He at least gave me credit and admitted he was wrong after that, LOL. Answer. This reminds me of when I was in 8th grade. We had the 17-year cicadas making an appearance where I live, and I was explaining to my science teacher how I had tons of seagulls by my house eating the cicadas. She proceeded to tell me over and over that we do not have seagulls in our area because we do not live by a body of water. Lake Michigan was 45 minutes away. I said, well, I definitely have seagulls in my yard eating cicadas. A week or so later, she comes back with a newspaper with a big picture of seagulls on it. They were hanging out in the suburbs to eat the cicadas. She admitted she was wrong, but like my entire life. Cicadas or not, we've had seagulls in parking lots. This lady must not have been from around here. We just had more because of the cicadas. Story 9. A Dutch couple visited my workplace, tourist visitor center, and insisted that the French translation on our map was wrong. The reasoning was that Groenland shouldn't be there because it was the Dutch word for Greenland, not the French one. I told them that Groenland was also the French translation, to which they chided back, and how would you know? I'm bilingual, I speak French. I informed clearly, not very well, they insisted, then proceeded to ask for the Wi-Fi so they could use Google Translate. Well, I gave them the Wi-Fi, and to Google Translate they went. Sure enough, Groenland. They didn't even apologize. They just said, I guess the map is correct then, and left. Assholes. Story 10. Didn't necessarily make anyone look dumb, but certainly made some people feel bad. I lived in Germany for a year after high school as part of an exchange program, and there were several times where I had to make phone calls. I had to call doctors, employers, program coordinators, etc. So I got fairly used to the whole telephone garb in German. I could speak pretty fluently on the phone, but since it's not my native language, I would of course make small grammatical errors and stuff like that. This led to the unfortunate situation where people would assume I was German when on the phone because I spoke well enough. But since I kept making mistakes, I was also stupid. People were quite rude to me over the phone, assuming that was due to the assumed stupidity. After revealing I was actually a foreigner, they always sounded so surprised and complimentary of my German and were much more helpful and polite afterwards. Answer: German here whose boyfriend is Spanish. He speaks German quite well, but with a very remarkable accent. He always asked me to do phone calls for him, which I refused because I thought it impedes his progress with the language, until I was present to a few phone calls. I was absolutely shocked how embarrassingly rude the people were on the telephone. Slow syllable by syllable talk in that shoot. Since then, I take over for him. Story 11. A tour group had a dad in it who insisted on trying to give his 2 cents on my animals and proceeded to put his fingers in the tank, despite my warning and practically yelling at him not to, with our stunted gators saying how hatchlings couldn't hurt a human, only for the male to shoot out of his favorite hide and latch onto his hand. Yeah, I had to bite my tongue to stop laughing. Story 12. At work one day writing a menu board for lunch specials, a couple comes in and start chuckling behind me. The lady gives me this snide look and says, "What's a sandwich?" It's spelled sandwich, honey. Ha 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 ha. She wrote sand, like in the desert. I just smiled and didn't even correct her. That cocky stupidity was truly a sight to behold. Answer: I had a customer inform me that the beer Yuengling, a very common beer in Western PA where I was at, was spelled wrong in our menu. She got really shoot about it, asking me if I felt embarrassed, etc. I asked her how she thought it should be spelled. Yingling. Edit. This happened in 2012 when I lived in the city was waiting tables. It is pronounced like Yingling. I didn't take issue with her being confused at the pronunciation. I was just shocked that she was so aggressive about being right and trying to insult me in the process. Her telling me, "I bet you're pretty embarrassed now," always stuck with me. Story 13. I am an application developer in the public sector. I have made many of the computer programs where I work, such as the human resources, incident reporting, and some of the case management systems. Several times I have had people try to tell me, wrongly, how to use an application that I made. I especially like it when they tell me I should ask the people at the company, what company would that be? I tell them that it is very flattering that they think that the software was made by an entire company instead of by me alone in my office. Answer, haha. Reminds me of the time we had a PM and his crew come in and brief our group on a migration they were about to do. What he laid out made no sense to anyone, and I figured I'd ask a few questions to maybe help him see the error in his ways. He got all pissed off that anyone would question his wisdom and asked who the hell I thought I was. The look on his face when I said the author of the procedure and code they were using was priceless. Fudge you, Greg. Story 14. I used to work at a Courtyard Marriott hotel, which is a hotel oriented for business people who have to up early and work late. You know, real workhorses and road warriors. The hotel was a sprawling 5 stories tall with around 200 or so rooms. It was also right next to LAX, so we always got a lot of business people flying in thinking they were hot tea because their company flew them out to do business in LA. Whatever. This one day I'm working front desk and it's kind of late, around midnight maybe. And one of our guests comes in, kind of tipsy, and asks for me to reset his room key before he heads to his room because we always do them wrong. So I'm like, yeah, sure thing, not a problem. Have a good night. He comes back down 5 minutes later, visibly agitated, and says, "What the heck, man? I thought I told you to remake my keys. Can you do your F-seeking job right? And in the hospitality industry, you're not allowed to talk back, raise your voice, or really stand up for yourself. Your one and only goal is to make the guest feel welcome. So I apologize, take the blame, and say it won't happen again, and make him an extra key." He snatches them from my hand and storms off to his room. 5 minutes later, he comes back down. Again, what is wrong with you? Are you stupid? Are you wasting my time on purpose? I'm heading to my room and you better come up with working room keys, and he throws his keys at me. My manager sees this all happen and is like, you know what? Let me handle this. You deserve a break. I'm fuming, of course. I go to the break room and just pace, wondering what gives people the audacity to act like that. My manager eventually comes back. He enters the break room with a smile and clearly something to report. He says he was going to the wrong floor. His room was actually 1 floor up. He said he's sorry. I wish I could have seen his face. Answer. This raised a memory. As a very young woman, I was staying in a cheap hotel with my underage sister overnight after a concert when a very tipsy and belligerent man began pounding on the door demanding to be let in. It was maybe 3 or 4 a.m., and I called 911 when he began screaming threats of violence if I didn't open the door. The operator could overhear it and promised an officer quickly. Suddenly, the man disappears. Pure silence for maybe 20 or 30 minutes. I'm falling back asleep. Suddenly, I hear the door handle jiggling and the lock unclicks. It's the hotel concierge unlocking the door, and he's got a tool to open the weird bar inside door lock thing as I'm screaming, bloody takedown. He tells me to let my tipsy brother sleep it off, and suddenly I hear police don't move. There's a commotion. The police tell me to close and lock my door, and we won't be bothered again tonight. The concierge assures everyone there was a misunderstanding, and I'll be comped in the morning. The next morning at checkout, the front desk claims no knowledge of this and tell me there's no way I'm getting a discount. Again, I was young and just accepted that at the time. But older and wiser, I now wonder if they were working together, if it was an honest mistake, and what the hell would have happened if I hadn't called 911. Story 15. I had a paper returned to me this morning because I didn't write out all the names of the authors in the manuscript. I took a screenshot of their submission guidelines detailing author names must be formatted with the first initial followed by last name and sent it back. Got an apology email and then submission received notification a few minutes later. Academia, I swear to God. Answer. Had a GF once who had finished her PhD in the humanities whilst I was partway through mine in science, lecture me about how I was writing a paper all wrong. Had to explain to her how the conventions in scientific literature were very different than in the humanities. It took her a while, but eventually she accepted that she wasn't quite the expert she thought she was. Story 16. When I worked as a cashier in a grocery store, people would always want to argue about their produce. They would bring up heads of iceberg lettuce and then argue with me that they were green cabbage, or vice versa. I would always just smile, void the product, and then charge them for what they thought it was. The best was seeing people come back later pissed that their coleslaw didn't work. The best, though, was the sweet potato versus yam argument that I would have with people several times during the week leading up to Thanksgiving. Most of what we sell in the U.S. are sweet potatoes, though some sweet potatoes grown in one state, Louisiana, are the yam variety of the sweet potato. But people often call them yams and will fight you over it, even though true yams are hard to find unless you're store-stock stuff for Latin American customers. We did, but yams were rarely in stock and always more expensive than sweet potatoes. Anyway, sweet potatoes would go on sale for the holiday, and people would buy lots of them. Every time I rang them up, I would get told that they were yams and that I was dumb for not knowing that. So I would void them and ring them up as yams for 4 times the price. When customers would want the sale price, I would kindly remind them that I had tried to give them the sale price, but that they had asked me to ring them up as yams instead. Answer: I knew that sweet potatoes came in a bunch of different varieties and had always kind of assumed that yams were a type of sweet potato. Well, after falling down a wiki hole, I now know that not only are they different species, they are entirely unrelated, and their respective lineages diverged about 100 to 140 million years ago. So thank you for pushing me to unlearn that particular factoid. Story 17. Was asked by my brother and girlfriend which planet is first starting from the sun. Was then belittled for 20 minutes after answering Mercury because they were adamant it was Venus. I was just disappointed because we are in our 20s. Story 18. Corporate trainer came to our offices to provide training. I popped into the room to say hello and see if she needed help. She was having trouble setting up the projector before the session. I started trying to help, but I'm not really savvy with projectors. She was getting frustrated with me as she assumed I was the IT dude, and obviously not a very good one. We eventually got it fixed, and I offered her a coffee. She was a bit rude to me by that stage. I got her one anyway. Fast forward to the session itself, and I introduced her to the room of 40 people and thanked her for coming. She realized I was the head of the division and was the one paying for her to be there. I felt very smug at that point. Story 19. Oh, working in retail has those moments constantly. People don't read the signs right, and one guy didn't get the right chips for the deal and was getting mad at me and told me to come and hell show me the sign. I had already dealt with people not reading the fine print on that deal, so I told him, I'm not going to look at anything. You can go look for yourself and read it, then come back with the right product. He came back without an attitude because he knew he was wrong, and from that point on, I always had my guard up when I saw him come in, and I was ready for a fight each time. Answer: I used to work in a supermarket, and one day a woman came up to me and said that the aisle 7 sign was installed upside down. It was an older supermarket, so the sign was a 1.21 MDF panel in yellow with a big number 7 painted on and just screwed to the end of the pallet racking. I pointed out to her that there's no way it had been rotated during the middle of the day since I was down there just a few minutes ago, but she wasn't having any of it. So she took me over there to show me, and of course, it was fine. She stumbled for words a bit, then said that someone has already fixed it. Story 20. This didn't happen to me, but to someone else. My stepmom used to be an occupational therapist and would help the elderly in the hospital. One patient she had to work with was Vietnamese, so he didn't know English. He came with his son, so my stepmom decided to ask him about his father, but her coworker interrupted her saying, I don't believe he speak English. This whole time, the son hasn't said a word while my stepmom was working with his father. When they were done, the father and son left, and as soon as you were at the door, the son turned around and said, Remember, I don't speak English. The coworker was dumbfounded when he said that, and all my stepmom could do was laugh. Story 21. My wife and I were traveling with a couple we worked with in South Korea. We weren't best friends with them, but they were nice enough, so we rented a car and traveled around the island of Jeju. Now, this is a small island, and you could drive around it in 4 or 5 hours, but we were taking our time seeing the sights. The guy was a bit of a know-it-all, but they had been in Korea 6 months longer than us, so I always tools his advice. Anyways, I'm driving the car, and we are trying to find the place that we want to eat. I say something like, we are going the right way. This guy responds with, no, we are going south. Trust me, I majored in geography. I look straight ahead into the setting sun and respond with, weird, we found the one place on earth where the sun sets in the south. Well, that shoot him up for a while. Answer, I have this with my wife all the time. She thinks I'm full of shoot when we're out, and she asks me which way is northeast, etc., and I answer straight away because she thinks you can't possibly just know without looking at a compass. I've tried to explain multiple times that I'm not magic. Sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And if you ask Mai at 9 a.m., I just look towards the sun and say, east is in that general direction. I've also said I can't do it so easy at midday as the sun is directly above us. But in the mornings and evenings, it's fairly simple. She still thinks I'm playing tricks, like I look at a compass on my phone every 2 minutes in case she asks, ha. Also, it helps that I'm a truck driver and have driven just about everywhere in my tiny country, so I pretty much know which direction I'm driving on any given road. Story 22. When I was in the Army, me and a group of specialists were standing in a circle, taking a break in the motor pool. A lieutenant came out and said he needed a forklift driver, went around the circle, pointed at each male and asked them if they had their license. None of them did. He huffed and walked away. He had obviously skipped over the other female and I in the circle. That was fine. We were the only 88 men, heavy vehicle operators, and forklift licensed people there. The dudes were all paralegals and HR specialists. Everyone laughed. What an embarrassing moment for him. Answer: reminds me a little of my aunt. She had a heavy vehicle license back on the day when it was super uncommon for a woman to have one. According to my dad, she was given several sideways looks when applying for jobs, until she passed every road test she was given with flying colors. Once, as the only woman applying for a job, I want to say it was a coach bus company, but I'm not sure, she met a hiring manager who gave her a whole spiel about not always being able to have one of the newer, easier to drive automatic buses, and assuming that's all she could do, they wouldn't be able to accommodate her only being able to drive those. She just politely told them she hadn't realized those were an option and asked to test on an old bus. She got that job. What people hadn't known was that her father owned a construction company with a bunch of big equipment and a little lot to park them at the end of the night. Instead of paying his expensive employees to fudge around for 40 minutes, trying to get their chute parked at the end of the night, they left it at the entrance. And it had been my aunt's job, starting at 15-16, to Tetris all the big rigs into the little lot ready to drive out at the next shift. There are very few types of vehicles she doesn't have experience with. Story 23. I'm currently a junior in college, and a couple of weeks ago when the semester started dying down, I left the dorms to come back home and finish things out online. I also started working at the local grocery store as well. Around a week ago, as I was checking out 2 customers when they told me they wanted to pay 50-50 with 2 cards. Our system requires us to manually enter the price, so I did, and the lovely gentleman told me my math was wrong and said he's a sophomore engineering student at a school nearby to help justify why he was correct. I respond, oh, cool. I'm actually a junior at, insert much better engineering school. What are you studying? While also pulling up a calculator and showing him he was wrong. Everyone always assumes the workers here are dumb, so it's always nice to show them otherwise. Answer, yes. I worked at a pub while doing my undergraduate degree. I remember an older man coming in, and as I was counting his change, he was going on and on about how young people rely too much on technology, and you wouldn't even be able to work out my change if the till didn't tell you, would you? My response was to laugh and say, I wish this till was fancy enough to actually tell me the change amount. I think it was supposed to, but that feature broke way before I started working there. He ignored this and then started going on about how all these kids studying useless subjects. Nobody knows how to do maths anymore. What do you study anyway? Media, I bet. With a polite customer service smile, astrophysics. Can I get you anything else? He just grumbled and wandered off with his pint. There's absolutely nothing wrong with studying media studies, obviously, but this guy clearly thought so and was not expecting the young woman serving him to be doing anything he respected. As an aside, I had the, oh, really? Response when I told people what I studied so often that I started asking, what did you think I do? After graduating, I worked in cybersecurity for a bit. Only woman in my department, and people would always assume I was doing some non-technical role. People who did the exact same job as me would ask what I studied, and when the above exchange inevitably took place, the answer was usually, I don't know, business studies? Okay, but I'm here doing the same job as you, which you know perfectly well does not even remotely relate to business studies. The rants I could have about these encounters. But I will save them for another post. Story 24. Some years ago, some guys were talking about cars and engines, and I don't even remember what. One of them was really condescending to me, and said, but you probably don't know anything about that, do you? My husband set him straight and said, She knows more about cars than I do, so don't be so sure. Then, of course, he tried to prove he knew more. He did not. I grew up around race cars and auto mechanics, who also thought everyone should understand their own car. I have to admit I know less now that they are all electronic and computerized, but this was back in the day. Answer: I, 27F, doing my master's in metallurgical engineering, went to an air gas recently to get copper lugs, and there's a worker, early 30s male, hanging them on the shelf. He says to me, "Hi, can I help you find anything?" And I tell him, "You've got them right here." Needing an insert size I don't remember, and he looks at me and says, "What is he using them for?" I'm not sure what kind of look I gave him for a split second before letting him know that I would be using them to crimp and braze stainless steel wire into them as a leak detection system for when I later melt steel. He got another worker to help me and never made eye contact with me again. Story 25. Oh, sure, but I find the opposite a better teaching environment, playing Street Fighter in a 7-Eleven. We had been playing it for, I think, years and felt pretty confident in the game. Some 14-year-old comes in and starts telling us about the Guile handcuffs. We scoffed and laughed at him. Guile doesn't have handcuffs, and holy crap, he showed us the darn move. Granted, it was a bug, but I never forgot that. I use that story whenever I need to. Story 26. I was working as a teller at the bank years ago, and a Karen was complaining about how slow and shoot my computer was. If I had been using an IBM, she'd have been out of there already. She works at IBM. They only make the best, fastest bank equipment. Blah, blah, blah. I slowly, deliberately turned my slow, shoot IBM computer for her to look at. Not another word. Story 27. I'm French and live in France, but I grew up in the UK and consider English to be like a mother tongue. When I was 17, I had to change schools, from a private one to a public one, and this was for personal reasons, but my new classmates assumed the reason was because my grades were too low and I got kicked out. The private school had high standards. Anyway, it's the first day of school and we have English class. The teacher hands out a list of sentences we have to translate and asks us to compare translations with our neighbor. The first sentence is rather hard to translate from French, and the teacher, after having walked around and looked at our answers, announces that only one person in the class has got it right. We compare answers with our neighbors. The girl next to me sees my translation. "How long has it been raining for?" And she bursts out laughing. Has it been? I've never heard that in my life. That is so stupid, and she makes fun of me for a good while to the other girl sitting next to her. Being new and also knowing that she was going to feel stupid in a couple of minutes, I didn't say anything. Sure enough, the teacher announces I was right, and my classmates quickly discovered that I was actually a fluent English speaker with excellent grades pretty much all around. It made making friends really hard, but I hope that girl learned her lesson to never make fun of someone without knowing the full story, or never make fun of people ever. That would be better. Story 28. Was talking about binary star systems at a party when suddenly my ex says, "That's not what binary is. Are you dumb?" Then another friend looked up the word binary and read it out loud to him. His eyes bugged out. I told him, "Stop pretending to be an expert on things you don't understand. It makes you look like an idiot." My ex was thinking of binary computer code. He didn't consider that other things could be binary too. Story 29. A director at work did this recently. We work with various agencies. He tried to rat me out in front of the other direction and our boss by saying I wasn't providing services to two places, one which I claim I am. I told everyone why the one site didn't get any services. The site wasn't eligible for the services he was talking about. It was a Zoom meeting, so I asked to share my screen. I showed them the proof that this site wasn't eligible. I then asked why he thought they were, why he felt it upon himself to check in on my office's sites, and why he felt the need to make sure I was doing my job with he wasn't my supervisor, director, and didn't work in my office. Come to find out, he decided to check to see if they were getting their needs met, because he had learned I also wasn't providing services at another site I claimed was getting services. I was easily able to prove that they indeed did get the services and he was talking to the wrong person. In the end, he looked like a jerk who was overstepping and possibly trying to get me fired or steal our funding, and I looked competent and professional. People are still pissed at him for this and no longer believes anything he says. Answer: something similar happened to me. My job was to promote a service the company offered to other companies, and I usually traveled with our product managers. My manager, who was in another country, asked me to dial into a meeting at a specific time. I dialed into the meeting and was ambushed by an HR drone attending with my manager. My manager accused me of not doing my job, as a PM had to deliver my presentation at a large client that we were desperate to sell the service to. He asked me why on earth I would duck out the very important meeting. I replied that he had refused me permission to travel. He said that is completely ridiculous, and he'd never stop me doing my job. I told him the email he'd sent saying I couldn't travel was being forwarded to him and the HR drone right now. I'll get back to you later. Never mentioned it again. Story 30. The day after graduating from high school, my brother, who had just learned to drive a stick manual transmission, took me to go look at cars. The very first one he drove, an old Ford Explorer, wouldn't shift into fifth gear, at which point I said to him, "I don't think you should buy this one. Something's seriously wrong with it." He told me to shut up, asked me what I knew about cars, and immediately bought it. A week later, the transmission dropped. The day the transmission dropped. What do I know about cars? Not much, but obviously more than you. It's been almost 20 years, and whenever he gets too full of himself, I remind him of that. Note, I still know almost nothing about cars except they go vroom and get me places. I've never had a major repair, like a bad transmission, in a little over 15 years of driving and owning cars. Answer, this reminds me of the time I went with my boyfriend at the time, he is now an ex, to buy a used vehicle. I really don't know much about cars, but I know when I get a gut feeling, I know that it's usually right. Anyway, we are looking at the cars. He sets his sights on this used Jeep Wrangler, and after a test drive, we're both in the office talking to the sales guy. Dude was being a bit pushy, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but I just didn't feel like this was a good deal. Most salespeople give me a pushy vibe. I've also had some awesome sales peeps that made a sale by not being pushy, but rather listening to what I was looking for. But this particular one just sat wrong with me. While we're all in the office, my ex pauses a moment as he's considering whether or not to go for it. I say to him that maybe he should sleep on it, and we can come back in the morning if he still thinks it's a good purchase for him. The salesman looked at me and then at my ex and gave him a bit of a laugh, and then my ex says, "Women, huh?" They both laugh, and my ex says, "Let's make a deal." The next day, he's gun-ho about going off-roading because that's the whole reason he wanted the Jeep, and at some point, he realizes that the Jeep doesn't have 404. I didn't even know that was possible. He had a mini crisis over it. He was so upset, was considering taking it back, but changed his mind because he would have to pay some kind of fee to do so. He ended up selling it like less than a year later. Honestly, never felt so smug before in my life. Not that I would have known that about the Jeep, but I knew enough to not rush into a purchase that felt off to begin with. Story 31. I'm profoundly deaf, so couldn't use the telephone to ring the bank. This was pre-internet banking. So all my banking had to be done in person at the counter. One day I went to the bank to change my address and asked the assistant to please look at me while she was speaking as I was deaf and a lip reader, then explained I needed to change my address with the bank. She looked at me, tutted, and said, "You could have done this by phone." We stared at each other for a few seconds before I said, "That would be a very one-sided conversation." She went bright red and changed my address. Story 32. When I was in 6th grade, our science teacher asked, "What is the shape of rainbow?" I instantly answered saying it's circle. Then the so-called topper of our class looked at me and laughed and did some trash talk afterwards when the teacher said, "Circle is the correct answer." Whole class laughed at her. Answer, when I was also in 6th grade, the teacher asked aloud what clouds are made of, and I answered water droplets with my friend to back me up. Everyone else in the class, including the teacher, ganged up on us saying it was water vapor. A day later, my friend and I gave a smug presentation explaining that the water vapor must condense on particulates into water droplets to form a cloud. We cited 10 academic sources and closed the presentation with, and I quote, "Never question the words of Monster and friend ever again." Edit, we don't talk about Monster anymore. Story 33. My best friend at the time assumed herself as the smarter one. In math class one day, we both came to different answers to a problem, so she starts to explain where I went wrong. Eventually, I said to her, we should check the answer in the back of the book, only to find out that my answer was correct. She was not happy it sparked the beginning of the decline of our friendship. Story 34. Once at a game night, someone made a comment about an aspect of languages. The comment isn't really important. The point is, they were vaguely wondering about a thing, and I answered the question. They had just met me and so tried to rib me by laughing and saying I was wrong. I said, "No. Pretty sure that's right, and this is why." He scoffed and said, "It's not like you have a degree in languages or something." Everyone else immediately dissolved into giggles as I informed him that actually I had just moved back from grad school after getting my second linguistics degree. The bright pink look on his face was wonderful. Answer, I have a white-collar education but work definitely in and as a blue-collar. It's fine, my choice. My coworkers were debating once about the difference between bay and gulf, ocean and sea, to the point where it was distraction and slowing us down. I casually offered the criteria on the classification. Then one person, who was never particularly like me, goes, "Fine nerd. What's inlet, fjord, and channel then?" Which I also answered. "Well, I'm going to ask Google and see if you're right." I was, after a long pause. "It's stupid that you know this shesh like that. No normal person should keep that shesh in their head." Story 35. I work at Starbucks, and I am a bilingual native Spanish speaker. Even though my English is not as good as my Spanish, it's pretty good. But some people think I have a speech impairment. One time I was talking with my coworkers and forgot a word in English. I just stuttered and honestly seemed pretty dumb at the moment. One of my coworkers laughed and started making fun of me. She was a transfer and didn't know I am a native Spanish speaker. A few minutes passed, and she was taking a drive-through order which had a Spanish speaker that didn't know much of English. She had a lot of trouble taking the order, and no one knew what she was saying. I immediately took over the order talking in fluent Spanish. Since that day, she keeps being hesitant to look me in the eyes. Story 36. Moved to a new city for work after graduating university. Figured since I was sticking around for a while, I'd check out some local bars for extra, low-stress work. The hope was to work as a dishwasher for beer and meet people between dish loads. I actually pulled it off too. Score. Well, one of the cooks had a dislike on for dishwashers and just kept bad-mouthing me every night. Calling me dumb, useless, will never amount to anything. I really didn't care as him. Running his mouth didn't faze me while I made good money at my day job. Figured he was projecting more than anything. Finally, the main cook, who I became good friends with, overheard jerk-off running his mouth again at me and told him all about my day job, graduating university, and only working for beer and meeting people. Once he heard all that, he never came back after that shift. Answer. I always dislike anyone who badmouths someone else's job as a whole in a workplace, especially in a restaurant setting where frequently every job is needed. One time at the restaurant, I worked at a waiter insulted the bussers, and I told them, "How about the bussers just don't show up for that Friday night dinner shift and we'll see how it goes." She shut up. Story 37. I made vegetarian nachos with fake mince in front of a bunch of friends for a party. Another friend showed up late and, unprompted, started trash-talking vegetarian food because the nachos were so good he could never give up meat. One of the other guests eventually corrected him. Story 38. Interrupted a group of Chinese girls on the subway in Beijing when they were saying some rude things about foreigners. A 6 ginger-haired white girl speaking Mandarin was clearly unexpected. Answer. LMAO, this reminds me of something that me and a friend did when in Munich. Said friend is Asian. Mom's Chinese, raised in Vietnam. Dad's straight Vietnamese. She looks SE Asian and speaks Vietnamese, whatever regional dialect her mom's family has from China, and a decent amount of Mandarin. We were on the train to Neuschwanstein, and these Chinese tourists got yelled at by the conductors for doing something, I don't know. Well, they start loudly meaning about Germans and how they do things, then trailed off to how stupid Western people are. Whatever. My friend is staring at them at this point because she understands almost every word, so they started going in about how dumb they thought she looked, just being racist twits because she's so brown compared to them, and she had to be American, because no Vietnamese cold ever afford vacations like they can. They're too poor and useless, probably can't even speak her own language. Ha 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 ha. So they quiet down, and she quietly says to me, "Remember when my mom and I taught you how to say yes and mean you agree in Mandarin?" I tell her I did. Okay, just keep agreeing. She just went on a loud rant in Mandarin about how Chinese tourists were the bottom of the barrel as far as all foreigners were concerned because they were so rude, and she didn't understand why they traveled. Since they were so unliked and didn't get anything out of it, they should just stay in Beijing because everyone disliked them, including everyone else in China. They just shut up and stared at her doing this while I sat there, not understanding a word, but agreeing in one of the 3 words I remember, but acting like I fully understood. When I found out what I was agreeing with later, I laughed my jerk off. Story 39. Ishurishan. My sister-in-law used to make fun of my English all the time. Whenever I mispronounced something, she would start laughing and telling everyone, "She's so cute, she can't pronounce this or that." I always considered her just a mean girl trying to keep the attention to herself, but the English thing really bothered me. One day we were drinking, and she started laughing at something I said. I lost it. I told her I speak 3 languages while she can barely speak English. We kept arguing until I said, "Fine, let's prove it." We took a mock-up English test online, and I got a perfect score. She got 812. That was the last day she laughed at me. Edit. Spelling edit. Thank you for the awards. It was a sweet victory. I just like to share this story to remind people to be kind and patient with others. Speaking English doesn't mean you're smarter than everyone else. Edit. Wow, this blew up overnight. Some background for the story. I'm originally from Colombia, but now I live in Canada. I speak Spanish, English, and French. To everyone that said I tried learning a second language, but it's too hard, try again. It's worth it. And yes, it will take years and effort, but it will open your eyes to a whole new world. Story 40. When I was about 5 to 6, I was obsessed with the Titanic, the ship, not the movie. Although all the ads around that time for home rentals probably got me interested in the first place. I knew every fact, every detail, every bit of trivia about that ship in its fateful voyage in 1912 for a few years there. Well, one summer, my family had a big get-together, as you do. One of my dad's uncles, my great-uncle, was there, who was a huge prick by all accounts. My dad disliked him anyway. And he happened to discover I was interested in the RMS Titanic, so he decided to quiz me, try and make me look stupid. He asked, "Hey, exactly how long was the Titanic?" According to my old man, I looked up, met my great-uncle square in the eyes, and deadpanned, 882.5 feet, duh. Needless to say, my dad enjoyed that moment. Story 41. When I was in grad school getting my master's in forensic psychology, I went on a date with a doctor from my internship. He was talking about studies showing that the human brain isn't fully developed until a certain age, but couldn't remember specifics. I told him it's 25. He looked shocked and said he was surprised because he thought I was just a blonde girl from Texas with big boobs. I was literally speechless that he would actually say something so stupid to my face. Story 42. I used to be really into Warhammer. At some point, I went in the store to get something, and some young guys were painting models. I walked over to see their work, and they kind of sneered at me, a woman in a male-dominated hobby. When I wanted to lift a model, one said, "Don't, you'll break it if you don't know how to hold it properly." After that, the owner of the store walked in, greeted me as an old friend, and we got into a conversation about how the new paints hold up to the old ones. You should have seen their faces. Story 43. I read this and thought it was asking if I ever assumed I was being dumb and made myself look dumb, and I guess this is a good example. Story 44. I was in a group project in high school, and a classmate of mine who was a complete tool kept talking to me extra loudly and slowly. I was very shy, still am a lot of the time, and it loosely translated to me not being intelligent, apparently. I didn't say much to him, let him go on about his business. We got up to the front of the classroom to present our stuff, and he hadn't bothered to read the information we submitted. Not only did he share incorrect information, but he became highly upset when I corrected him in front of the class. Bonus content, he plays in the NFL now. Not relevant. I just know someone that plays in the NFL. Story 45. I was checking out at a store once and paying with my debit card. I proceed to use my finger to press the touchscreen buttons instead of using the stylus. The cashier says you shouldn't do that. So many people touch it and it's gross. I use the pen. So I say people use their fingers to touch the pen too. And then his face fell and he looked like died inside as he realized how stupid his comment was. Story 46. Some guys came through my line a few weeks ago at the store and I asked for their IDs for the beer. One guy showed his ID, but for the rest of the transaction tried to argue with me that I only need to see the ID of the buyer. It's any viable person I think may have some in my state. And after they paid and left, the guy next in line informs me that he was the regional guy who checked and made sure stores followed adult beverage laws, and that I was completely correct on what I said. Answer: that must have felt great. In my country, there is both a personal and company fine for people who sell adult beverage to adults who then pass it on to minors. You have the total right to refuse sale to someone with ID if you believe they're passing it on, and the law will back you up. It bugs me when people want special treatment knowing it would financially ruin your own life, not just get you fired. Story 47. While still enlisted in the Army, I worked in the maintenance field. Basically, if it had moving parts, I knew a little bit about it. Now, every year my unit goes on annual training, and this particular year, we got 6 brand new generators. Now, the section they belonged to was headed by a sergeant who had over 15 years of service and knew his job inside and out, backwards and forwards, and then decided that I didn't know how to do my job. In his wisdom, he decided that the fuel cans for his new generators would be set next to said machines. All well and good until I told him they needed to be placed on a secondary containment to prevent fuel spilling on the ground, because we can get in huge trouble for that. He disregarded what I said with some idiotic excuse, don't rightly remember what, and went on his way. So naturally, I reported the violation of orders to my superior. Within 5 minutes, there was a jerk chewing and the fuel cans were put on a secondary containment. Story 48. I used to project manage train modifications. I was in charge of a particularly difficult door mod on a fleet of trains where the fleet director was an arsehole from the minute he realized he had to deal with a female project manager with waist-length blonde hair who barely looked 30. I was over 30 but looked younger. At the time, I was driving a large gray Volvo, but it was in getting some work done. So I took my fun car to work with me for the week. The fleet director commented on how he saw it in the car park and immediately knew the Barbie car was mine right in the middle of a project meeting with the train owners. Someone asked me what kind of car it was out of interest, and I told them it was a Peugeot 207 convertible. And he said, "No, dear, that's a VW Beetle." "It doesn't surprise me that you don't know cars." I said, "Well, I have it insured as a Peugeot, and I think they would let me know if I'm wrong. And I've owned the car for a while now, so I think I know what kind of car I own." I didn't want to embarrass him further, so I tried to continue with the meeting until we get to a coffee break and he brings it up again. By now, a few people had been out for a cig break and seen the car, and it's obviously not a Beetle, so they looked awkward but didn't stand up for me. He starts to laugh that I don't know which kind of car I own, and I only have it because I wanted a pink car. I actually let my daughter choose it, but none of these men knew I had children because fudge M. So I take my car keys out and put them on the table and tell him to look at the Peugeot logo on them and to feel free to go and open the pink car with them and confirm who is right about the car I own. I wish I could say he backed down, but all he said was that there must have been 2 Barbie pink cars when he walked past the car park and he only saw the one, which was a Beetle. He really was a fudge idiot. Story 49. When I was working as a pharmacist assistant, people would always ask for the pharmacist, because I was young, and they assumed an assistant is an idiot, not like I studied or anything. One day in particular, an older lady was rude to me, saying she had to see only the pharmacist, so I called him, and he heard her story out, and she wanted some cold medicine and a Vit B injection. He told her, "I'm a bit busy, but my assistant will gladly help you," and he walked away. I got her the medicine, explained how to use it, and gave her the shot, being as friendly as I would be with any other customer. She was so disgusted and kept muttering about me being disrespectful. I think the embarrassment was too much because I never saw her again. Hope she never treated someone like that again. Story 50. High school economics class. Teacher asked about a specific lottery jackpot and if you should take lump sum and invest or take annual payments. I said, take the lump sum, and a girl in class said, for once jitsu, I'm smarter than you. Teacher then went on to explain why taking lump sum was better. Didn't talk to her for 10 years. Got married 8 years ago. Funny how life works. Story 51. I'm an audio engineer for a few major record labels in a big music city. I'm also a woman, and this is an extremely male-dominated field. I'll get a lot of blind date sessions where I just get called in and don't know who I'm working with until I get there, and it can be the same on the client's end. I'll be the only person in the room, sitting at the computer with the recording software up, and when they arrive, they'll ask, "Where's my engineer?" When I say it's me, there's visible disappointment, and sometimes the clients will actually complain that they need someone else. The studio manager just assures them that they're in good hands, even though Ivy tried to do the same. They usually still aren't happy, but at that point realize it's either me or they don't record. After the first few minutes of recording, they ask if I take sessions outside of the studio, what my rates are, and what my number is so they can hire me for their sessions at other studios. They go from thinking I know nothing to saying I'm going to be their engineer within a matter of 10-15 minutes. It gets tiring and annoying because it happens so often, but they don't realize when they walk in that I've been doing this for over 10 years and that I know what I'm doing. Story 52. Had a young lady in college come in after a windy day and ask me, "Do I look disheveled?" I told her, "Yeah, a little bit." She followed up with, "Do you even know what that means?" "Yeah, it means your hair and clothes were out of order because of the wind. It's disorderly looking." We ended up in a couple classes together later on. I greeted her the first time in the next semester with a cheery, "Hey, disheveled." We ended up being casual friends until we both graduated and we went our separate ways. Story 53. Early 2000s, I was having to work out of town with another guy, but company only gave us one hotel room. I was in my 20s, he was probably in his 40s, and I knew he thought pretty highly of himself. He was looking at some stuff on a laptop while I was watching TV, and he asked me something like, "Do you know if this VoIP thing is any good?" I thought for a second and replied along the lines of, "Well, I know they're growing, but I've never used Facebook Messenger or Skype or anything for that before, so I can't say from personal experience. At the time that was true, I didn't even have a Facebook account. He kind of sighed and says, "I'm not talking about Skype." I said VoIP. Then he gets this super condescending tone in his voice and says, "Do you even have any idea what I'm talking about?" I just kind of looked at him and cocked an eyebrow a little bit, and then I put on lecturing professor sort of tone and reply, VoIP, or VoIP, is an acronym that stands for Voice over Internet Protocol. It's a generic term that can refer to any system that allows you to transmit audio over the internet and communicate with another person. Skype is built entirely to do that with video as well, and Facebook Messenger has a feature where that's an option. He just sort of blinked and then quietly said, "Oh," and went back to his laptop. Story 54. I was arguing with someone over the delisting of wolves. It eventually led to the dude accusing me of blowing smoke out of my jerk. Said I needed to educate myself. So I sarcastically said, "What exactly do I need to educate myself on?" While uploading peer-reviewed studies and official government data that backed up everything I had said. I then commenced to follow up with M studying wildlife biology and own a wildlife rescue. I specialize in wolves and coyotes. I wasn't really accused of blowing smoke out of my jerk after that. In fact, the entire tone shifted. I guess they didn't want to admit that they looked like a tool. Answer: I live just down the road from a wolf sanctuary. Spend practically every weekend there learning about wolves and doing what I can to help raise awareness. And all the time, random people act like they know more about wolves than I do. I've tried to explain time and time again why it is an absolute atrocity that wolves have been delisted despite being extremely endangered. Now we've got Idaho trying to eliminate off over 1,300 wolves. It's just awful. This is what happens when people cling to fairy tales about how oh-so-evil wolves are. And of course, the decision had to be a political one rather than a scientific one. Ecosystems all over the U.S. desperately need an apex predator, and wolves were designed for that job. I'm glad that Colorado will be getting some wolves back, as our ecosystem definitely needs it. Thank you for doing what you do to help protect these majestic and vital animals. We need to be the voice that they don't have. Story 55. I'm a liquor broker with professional beverage certifications who also happens to bartend a couple of nights a week at an upscale hotel bar, and I've had many a patron try and tell me, incorrectly often, the differences between different whiskeys, how they're made, etc., etc. I just smile behind my mask and nod and carry on. Story 56. One of my clients filed a frivolous lawsuit after I refused to give him free services or a refund for his dissatisfaction of a service he had absolutely no reason to be dissatisfied with. During the deposition, it became clear that both the client and his attorney made the mistake of assuming I was just a meathead. The attorney ended up so flustered that he lost his composure, insulted me, always a clear sign that the other person has literally no factual argument, and we had to recess. After he apologized, he asked a couple more questions and ended the deposition. Insurance ended up settling the claim for almost nothing, just to avoid civil trial. Story 57. Many times. My favorite, though, was when my neighbor where I live now going into great detail about the Pendleton Roundup when we were talking about going to a local rodeo, how big the arena is, how famous it is when it first started. He told me about all the events and how they work as if I had never been to any rodeo. Then he asked me where I grew up. Pendleton, Oregon. Story 58. It was more along the lines of underestimating me in sport. In high school PE, I was treated pretty badly by many classmates. I'm small, quiet, passive, and it made me an easy target. We were playing baseball one day, and it was my turn at the bat. They all scooted in real close, shouting stupid remarks. I bit my tongue and blasted that goddamn ball out of the field. I walked my way around the bases and tried to hide my smile. I had played some softball when I was younger and was fairly decent at it, and if I was pissed when I played, that ball would leave town. Worked pretty well for me that day. Answer: had a similar experience in middle school. I was short, into fashion, really girly, but my mom taught at the school, so I got there 2 hours early every day and would spend that time working out in the exercise room with weights and stuff. So one day in gym, we go to the exercise room, and this kid starts laughing at me for putting weights on the squatting bar, saying I'm not going to be able to lift that much, yada yada. So I basically tell him, I'm fine, thanks for the concern, and he pushes and asks for a weightlifting competition. He worked on a farm, so I guess he thought he would win in a landslide. You can imagine his surprise when I'm squatting like 200 pounds and he can't even get past 150. I also ended up being the only person to do chin-ups for the fitness test. I needed 3 to pass, I continued and got to 9 until the teacher told me I could stop because I couldn't score any higher. That was fun too because the entire class was watching, expecting me to fail LOL. Story 59. My natural hair color is bleach blonde, if that helps set the scenario. I'm petite, was told I should have been a model, but instead I decided to go into computer programming because that felt more like something I'd want to do. And I worked hard to become the coordinator for a fairly large brand's web services team in the late 90s through 2010. This included server maintenance and upgrades, data warehousing, programming, and creative content, all at my direction, and it was a blast. I used to go to tech conferences all the time, and particularly in the 90s, I was mistaken for a booth babe. God, I hope that's not still a thing. Other times I would ask questions about products and the sales guys, because way back then it was always guys, would often ask me if my tech director was with me so they could bring him in on the discussion. It happened maybe 20 of the time back then, but it always shocked me. I then began asking highly technical questions they couldn't really answer with the sheer goal of making them feel badly for making assumptions. Things have changed significantly in the past 15-20 years. I see far more women representing the product teams, and nobody ever asked me about my IT director anymore. It probably helps that my position is on the badge I'm wearing, but that was the case 25 years ago as well. I'm glad to see better representation, and at least the conferences I attend there are no more booth babes. Story 60. My best friend and I were hanging out and wanted to watch a DVD on her family's Xbox. We got power but no video or audio. I looked behind the TV and found the cat chewing on the AUX cable. He was noted for doing this. I reached behind the TV and blindly plugged everything back in from what I could see. Still nothing. Her brother comes home and she asked for his help. I explain I had plugged it all back in after the cat pulled them out, but still nothing. He tells me, with great authority, that I shouldn't have bothered because as a girl, I would never understand how the complexities of a game console worked. It was called an Xbox because only men have the X chromosome. It's been 20 years and I still remember the smug look on his face because only men have X chromosomes. You're an idiot and a chode, Matt. An idiot and a chode. Story 61. I asked my older sister what dinosaur the chicken nugget I was holding was, and then she, full of confidence, says, "Are you fudge stupid? That's a rhinoceros rex, dumbass." It was a triceratops. Also, rhinos aren't dinosaurs. Story 62. I helped by carrying in a box of documents for our trial in a patent pharmaceutical case. Tip: don't be a stuck-up, as the staff support are invaluable and rightfully will make it hard for you if you're a jerk. Seeing this, co-counsel's lead attorney hadn't met me as he flew in late the night before, asked me to get him a cup of coffee. I told him as second chair for my team, I was preparing for taking our lead witness's testimony, and he should ask his second chair. Story 63. I was working in IT at an investment firm. A contractor, senior engineer, needed another person to work with, but was very demanding in who they'd work with. I was told to work with him when my manager told him he'd be working with me. He looked over at me, looked back at the manager and said, "I wouldn't do." He thought I couldn't hear the conversation in the distance, but I could totally hear it. He said, "I require someone with at least a bachelor's from prestigious university, knows the company's code, and knows design patterns." My manager responded, "I've got the perfect person for you." He pointed direct to me. The contractor said, "Didn't you hear what I just said?" I finally stood up and said, "What about me makes you think I didn't go to prestigious university, know our code, or can't write a factory pattern?" I could see the gears in his head finally begin to move as he paused. He walked off without saying a thing. Story 64. A group of college students from an obscure Christian cult stopped me during my run to evangelize to me. Unfortunately for them, I am a PhD student in theology. They started asking me if I was familiar with certain things in the Bible, and I responded quoting chapter and verse, poking holes in their logic and asking follow-up questions. The poor girl obviously had a script to stick to because she did not engage any of my questions, but just kept repeating that scripture clearly shows that their church is the only one in the world that actually knows the truth, even though I demonstrated why that makes. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you'd like to see more content like this, you might be interested to know that I've created another channel with a similar theme, especially for those of you who enjoy what I do. I'll leave a link in the description, and I hope to see you there. Take care.